What is up, everybody? Thank you for joining us on the first episode of The Watchmen, or I guess it's just Watchmen. I don't know, Leland.
It's
Are we
just
The
Watchmen.
Watchmen or Watchmen? It's just Watchmen.
I like Watchmen because then
We'll get
everybody else can
into
feel like they're participating, like they're part of the Watchmen.
True. We'll get into the name here in a second. It looks like we are live on X. It's working. I can see your guys' chats. I'm hoping to get to some questions. We're going to go. We have some stuff planned for the first little bit. We'll see how long it goes. And then we can hopefully get to some questions after. So feel free to throw them in as we're talking, and we'll try and hit some of them at the end. So let's just start by talking about the purpose of the show. Leiland came to me, I don't know, it was like the end of last year with this idea to do the show, and I loved it. It's a great idea. I was super busy at the time. Leiland was super busy at the time. So it was kind of like, yeah, we want to do it. And then we didn't. Mostly my fault. And then as we started working with Mitch on some of the Dwelt stuff, I realized here was a platform we could use to do our show that we've been wanting to do. And so here we are, launching this show tonight, live on X. And the idea of the show, let me share my screen real quick so you guys can see. The idea of the show is to give a unique perspective on what is happening in the world. A perspective that I think Leiland is amazing at. Way better than me. I'm just here to enjoy the ride, honestly, like you guys. So Leiland's a genius. He's going to give us a perspective on what's happening in the world, politically, culturally. We're going to get into history, science, all kinds of stuff. And look at it through this lens of prophecy and what we know has been happening for thousands of years now, this war between Babylon and the kingdom of God. And we know the kingdom of God is established in the end, but we're kind of right at the crescendo right now of all the stuff seeming to come together. And so it's an exciting time to be alive. And as we're looking at, or at least me, as I'm like looking at the landscape of the world, there's some great shows out there. I'm obviously, I don't hide the fact that I love Alex Jones. You have Tucker, you have even people like Glenn Beck, who I'm sure knows all this stuff, but he's targeting like a pretty mainstream audience. And you have all these shows who are really good, and they're predicting a lot of things that are coming. They can kind of, I would say they have some discernment. They're able to see a lot of what is happening, but they're missing such a huge chunk because they don't have this gospel perspective and the prophetic perspective. So that's the point of the show. We're going to try and look at what's happening through that lens, so that you are not deceived. We're not like, we don't have secret doctrine. We don't have like some cult or anything. We're just looking at the events of the world through scripture and how we think things are playing out. So with that being said, the name of the show, this was actually brought up to us. We were on a meeting with Mitch Waite last night, and this was his idea. It was so good. So we're pretty pumped about this. It comes from Isaiah 21. I'll just start reading it, 5-10. Prepare the table, watch in the watchtower, eat, drink, arise, ye princes, and anoint the shield. For thus hath the Lord said unto me, go set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, a chariot of asses and a chariot of camels, and he hearkened diligently with much heed. And he cried, a lion, my Lord, I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and I am set in my ward whole nights. And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all their graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. And I think we get to watch Babylon fall, and it's going to be quite the show. So with that, Leiland, go for it. What do you got?
I think there's one more scripture there in Isaiah 21 that is applicable, especially with our subtitle. So hit the space bar one more time. And you've got Isaiah 21, a little further down, 11 and 12, that says, the burden of Duma, he calleth me out in seer. Watchman, what of the night? Watchman, what of the night? The watchman said, the morning cometh, and also the night. And if you will inquire ye, return and come. So this is kind of the idea of it, is that Isaiah, Daniel, Amos, Ezra, we're going to talk about, all of these prophets are in Babylon during a time of bondage, of capture, of political strife, of political upheaval. They're court prophets for the most part, with Isaiah. And so a lot of their sayings concerning the scattering of Israel, the downfall of nations, the corruption of nations, they're dark. They're not great. They're in the night. This is when these secret combinations happen. This is when the Lamanites gather and come to attack. And so you've got to have somebody watching in those night hours. And so it's fitting, because I think a lot of the themes and the topics and stuff that we'll talk about, like they're not accepted in the mainstream. We live in Isaiah's day that he saw for us, where good is called evil and evil is called good. Everything's inverted. So the things that are mainstream, if we know that we're in that time period, in that time frame that Isaiah saw, then we shouldn't be buddy-buddy with what the majority is, drinking in for the Kool-Aid. So that's the idea of this filter, this idea of us being these watchmen on the tower and looking into the night, that sometimes it can be a little doomsy. I know with the Dwelt podcast, you guys get that feedback as well. When you're prepared and you're far-seeing, or your vision expands and you can see even, not just the blessings of the right hand, but the deeds and the destruction of the left, and even those of the secret combinations. Like when you're aware of these types of stratagems and things, it can be a little doomy. So to counter that, just keep in mind, that's not our intent. Our intent is that once you work through that, once you become aware of these things, it becomes a strength to you. What was ignorance and weakness becomes a strength, because you see things coming and they don't faze you as much. You're expecting things to happen, right? So like this coming election, everybody now has been talking for the last several months or even like years that there might not even be one, that there might be some type of crisis, that there's no way they're going to let Donald Trump into the presidency. Or, how is Biden going to continue to be for 4 years? This senile guy just kind of walking around, airwalking everywhere. Like there is legitimate questions that are being brought by the whole public mainstream consciousness, but they're missing this prophetic angle. They're missing that prophecy is being fulfilled as everybody's starting to see these things. So to me, that's testimony building. That's not like a doomsday take where I'm just looking for reasons to be upset and angry at the world. On the contrary, I'm looking for reasons to validate what prophets have told us are going to happen. So many things have already happened up to this point that everything else coming on from here out is going to be like the greatest show ever. Just like President Nelson has been promising and has promised and hasn't let down. Like ever since he gave that talk where he said, we'll see some of the most marvelous things between then and when the Lord comes again. I mean, it's all part of what we're watching geopolitically. That's all part of it. It's not just all coincidence and then all of a sudden Jesus does something. Like it has all been in concert for thousands of years building to this point. Every prophet going back into time looked forward and saw our day, saw this final battle between God's Zion-like society or his kingdom versus the kingdom of the devil, which we refer to as Babylon, or Isaiah does as Babylon, and also Egypt, because of the captivity of Israel in Egypt during Moses's deliverance. So like these are all things that we will be using in our lens to interpret the news. So I riffed on that slide for a little bit. We can go to the next and then kind of jump into it, unless you had some more. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add. I mean, we get the doomsday thing all the time. And I always say, like, just listen to the brethren over the last few years in conference. Like, they're talking about the stuff that's coming, and they're so they're excited, and it's always positive. Like you just said, President Nelson's talking about the amazing miracles we're going to see, that every prophet in history has looked to this time. Like there's going to be some bad stuff, but overall, like the kingdom of God gets established. It's good. The end is good. It's what Mitch always says. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of Babylon. And that's a good thing.
Exactly. Babylon is fallen. Babylon is fallen. That's what we're watching. And we should rejoice in the fact that this means the millennium has come, that Zion is going to be established and rise. And that's what our stakes and our wards are for. We're waiting for that moment for when Babylon falls, when all of the worldly nations collapse. And you all can feel the foreshocks of that with how often in the news, and we'll talk about it, is global war being threatened, right? With the very suspicious death of the Iranian president and high-level officers, right? Like, is there going to be retaliation? Yeah, there are rumors of it. And these are things that lead to the next world war that are going to change the geopolitical, the landscape of nations, likely for the final time. So this is awesome that we're alive at this time. It's amazing that we get to experience this. But a lot of people aren't experiencing it in a joyous way. They're not seeing it as a testimony building thing, but they're confused. They don't know where to go for truth. So, all right. This slide I made is awesome because the crux of what we're talking about, even in if we want to talk about politics, what's going on with elections and governments and nations and wars, well, we are talking about Zion versus Babylon. It's about kings and kingdoms, and Jesus Christ is the King of Kings. He has always, from the beginning, from Adam's time, set up a kingdom. That's what our Heavenly Father is. He's a king. So like that's the role. That's the program. Now, from Adam to Noah, there were righteous sons of God who attained unto a perfect government, a perfect type of religion, a perfect type of society. And it was called Zion. And it was Enoch, the seventh from Adam. And they were taken up off the earth into, they were translated. These people were living the dream. They were living a paradise. They had brought paradise back through their obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ. After the flood, you have another society that's built as well. And all of the people between Adam and Noah, all of the righteous people were either died and went to paradise to wait, or they were translated and taken up into Zion. The same thing with all of the righteous people from Noah down to Abraham. There was Melchizedek, who was like the Enoch of that time period, where he also built a city, a king and a kingdom. He was the king of peace, Melchizedek, and his city was the city of peace, Salem. And they, like Enoch, they lived such a law and government and social order that they were also taken up off of this lower plane to live a higher law, a higher, holier way. That's what Zion is. Now, Abraham, he was like the Noah and the Adam of old. He had been left on the earth with the same priesthood and ability to create that kind of city and that type of kingdom for the Lord to work through. He had been left like a new Adam. And so the covenant, that promise that brings that Zion-like society, it was given through Abraham and his seeds, right? Now, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, those are the three fathers of the Old Testament, all the Abrahamic religions, the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians, they all stem from this covenant promise where God was again trying to establish a holy city, a Zion, just like Melchizedek and and Salem before, or Enoch and Zion prior to that. That's what Israel and its city, like its people, were meant to do in building up a temple and being allowed to have a tabernacle and a temple later with Solomon. That was supposed to be the new Salem, the new Zion, the new thing that went up. But they failed and they were scattered. That's what I have on this diagram. You have Zion being, or Israel being called to be the next Zion through Moses, who he's like, hey, we're going to build a temple. He calls them up to the mountain. They reject it right away and they fall into the pride cycle. It's familiar to us also in our faith, because that's what the Book of Mormon is all about. They're the same people. They're a branch of the same Israel getting scattered, and they go through the same pride cycle of obeying God and living in societies that have the benefit of freedom and divine relationship and covenant relationship with God, or they spin off and have a political corruption, Babylon type city, the Lamanites versus Nephites, where you have one government take over the other. This has been going on anciently, since Adam's day, since Enoch's day, and it's just continuing now. But the cool thing is that we're witnessing the long version of Israel's failure to build a Zion society. They were scattered, but it was in the wisdom of God that they would be scattered all over all the world, so that when he called them again here in the latter days, when he sent his servants, his disciples, his apostles out to the Gentiles, they were to also gather scattered Israel. It was to bring them all back. And the people that they would affect, the lights that they would be upon the hill, and the people who would see them, they would be drawn to Christ in the end when he did gather them. So it'd be like this giant reap and harvest, using Israel and their stubbornness, but to the maximum effect to get all the way around the world. Fast forward to our day and the restoration through Joseph Smith. That's the beginning of the gathering. The Book of Mormon is evidence of it. That's self-evident in the Book of Mormon, its text. It says that. It says, when these things come forward, the gathering has commenced. This was the message of Christ when he came to the Americas and visited the Nephi-Lehite branches, right? So I bring all this up because politics is about this. It's about political systems that have denied God, are doing their own thing. They're the worldly political kingdoms, when that was never the way it was supposed to be set up from the beginning. It was always like a God king, essentially. Adam being the divine king of his divine family under the priesthood order, the order of God, right? That's how you perpetuate righteous societies, is by following the commandments of God, obeying him. This land, America, was built on those fundamental ideas, those same freedoms and stated objectives of building a righteous city like Moses did when they had the 10 Commandments and all of the instructions given to Moses to guide Israel and to beat them basically into this type of Zion-like society. So that was a big rant. I hope I made some sense there, Chris. I don't know if I went too off the rails, but like we're building up to this, to the millennium where God's kingdom and Zion will be fulfilled, where Israel will be gathered and they will achieve Zion. And there will be two main centers in Jerusalem and in Missouri, with all of us here, the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, across the American continent. Now that's a little esoteric, I guess, Latter-day Saint doctrine in terms of who we are and who we know and believe we are as the tribes of Israel, being branches of Joseph, scattered over, just like Joseph was abandoned and scattered by his brothers, but also provided a way for them to come back into the presence of God, God and protection later. He delivered them. That's what our church, the Joseph Smith and the Restoration, is that same branch of Joseph in the latter days doing the same thing for Israel, preparing a way for them to come into safety during this turmoil where all of the nations that Daniel and all these prophets saw in vision, all of the nations will collapse and society will, again, it's going to be very scary with the Antichrist leading and all these things. That's when Zion stands up. That's when the millennium happens. So, okay, I hope I painted the big picture because that's prophecy. Prophecy is the testimony of Jesus, which means you understand the plan of salvation. Why was Jesus sent here? Who is Jesus premortally? Why is he here in mortality? And what is my relationship to him in immortality? That is prophecy. So if you're not seeing the big picture all the time, zooming out instead of just getting myopically stuck in politics, day-to-day business or whatever, you've got to be zooming out and seeing how it fits on the grand chessboard of our life here on earth. I think it's a beautiful thing. But to others, it's like a lot of work. You got to be thinking and this and that. Why am I always thinking? I just want somebody to tell me, what I should be believing right now. But that's not where revelation comes. Revelation comes in you seeking and asking and diving into these things for yourself so that you can have your own witness, that you understand your place at this pivotal time in history in these last days. I think it's amazing. So hit the button. I think I have Daniel's. Oh, go ahead real quick. Go.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think we're hoping that we can point you guys to where to study, right? A lot of people know vaguely something's up. They know things are getting crazier. They've heard all of the second coming stuff, but they don't know really where to start. And I'm hoping we can point you guys there, right? Like we started off this whole thing with those scriptures from Isaiah. Go study that tonight and see what you can come up with. Pray about it. I also like this timeline because this is kind of what I was alluding to in the beginning is we're really trying to take a perspective that takes all of this into account in what's happening today, because this isn't like a battle that just started in 2016 or, in 2000, whatever. It's not in the last 100 years. It's not in the last 1,000 years. It's been since the beginning, this battle between good and evil and the kingdom of God and Babylon. So I like that this displays that on a nice, clean timeline.
Well, and to reinforce that, and we'll talk about it later, and I'm sure ad nauseum as we continue to look at the news, but it's the same premortal battle between Lucifer and Jehovah over the agency of man, over the freedom of man. So when we talk about it politically in our time, it's like tyranny versus liberty, right? But then you even have a corruption of liberty doctrines now with liberation theology and all this type of stuff seeping in to turn that into a more tyrannical version. It's the Antichrist always doing what he does best, taking something good, delicious, and amazing and corrupting it, rotting it, incepting it. It's gross. Stop it. Okay. So you've pulled up Daniel's, it's just a diagram I pulled off Google. Like it's nothing special. It's not like V1. I just did it because it's kind of like in a sketch style that I like the aesthetic, but it shows the different visions of Daniel. And Daniel, he prophesied about the kingdoms of the world, just like other prophets did. Because guess what? Since they weren't able to achieve Zion, they saw the end of it though. They saw their gathering and how Zion would be gathered together in the end. But they also saw these hegemonic forces, these world-dominating forces that would substitute themselves and pretend to be the light upon the hill and pretend to be the temple and connected to heaven and have the authority to kingship and dominion. But they don't. They never have. This was the battle before between Melchizedek and Zion in Abraham's day. You had Nimrod building the Tower of Babel, calling himself a false king and a false high priest and a false divine figure. Even before the flood, you had again the fallen watchers and people corrupting the true order of God and politics and government. Well, not politics, but God's governing power, his doctrines of dominion, corrupting them for selfish reasons, for tyrannical reasons, to take from someone else, to kill someone else and take their gain. Those types of dirty tricks have been going on from the beginning. And they just started to become, like, as we understand world history, probably here at about 600 BC, where Daniel's vision starts. Daniel's a contemporary of Nephi. We got to remember that. So our Book of Mormon starts about this same time period, 600 BC, where Jerusalem is being captured by who? By Babylon, the first kingdom in Daniel's visions. He's captured by them. He goes, he's a court prophet, again, living in the kingdom, or in the king's palace, Nebuchadnezzar and others, right? And so Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he sees all of the seceding kingdoms that will supplant him being the most dominant in the world for his time. He sees that the next will be Persia. He sees that the next after them will be Greece and Alexander the Great. And after him, then the Romans. And they come in and they corrupt everything. And with a combination of Greek philosophy and the Roman militarism and their inverting of the religious rites into the cults that they had, their secret initiations, they used it as a means of control to abuse the power of governance, of dominion, of building a righteous society. And so it was all for selfish gains. Now, if you follow the timeline, Rome, it breaks up and deteriorates. I think we go into some of it in some of the future slides. But I just wanted to point out here that this vision from Daniel and Ezra and all these people who are seeing all of the political kingdoms and what happens until the second coming, they all have these visions and experience these things about the same time that Israel's getting scattered, because that's the big loss. They had their lost opportunity to be Zion, to be that kingdom of God on the earth. They had it offered to them with Moses, and they rejected it. That's why Moses gets translated and they don't. That's why you have all these people, even the judges who come and save them, but then Israel's stubborn, right? And then you have the kings who came and they tried, but then they were beguiled and left, out to themselves. So moving forward, when we examine the news and we talk about these things, these are the things that we have as assumptions. That we believe Daniel was a prophet. We believe Ezra was a prophet. We believe all the prophets of the Bible were prophets, and they were inspired and led through revelation from God. And that they saw the things that they saw, and that they left them there, not just because they're cute stories that we get to tell, but because they're relevant to us. That by understanding the past, we have more foresight into what is coming for our future. That's how prophecy works. When you understand how God works, you understand what comes before you, what comes next, what the consequences of actions are as you observe things around you. So we can skip forward. I think I belabored the Daniel vision, unless you had any other questions or anything else to add. Is my audio lagging?
Nope, I was on mute.
Oh,
I was trying to switch back to the right tab to unmute myself. No, you're good. We can keep going.
Okay, so let's run through these fast. Like, click a bunch of them because I know they come in kind of slow. How did Babylon rule? It's important to understand this because even John in the book of Revelations, he's looking at the controlling powers in the last day, and he's calling it Mystery Babylon, because it's the same principles that were exercised 600 BC or 1500 BC with Egypt, or even before then.
Real quick, Leiland.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to lay the groundwork for what we're talking about here. These are the assumptions Leiland and I are taking when we're looking at news and stuff that's going on in the world, in this episode and in future episodes. So these are the things that are kind of making up the lens at which we're viewing the world.
And these assumptions right here are very specific to Babylon and how Babylon exercised dominion to a global extent, right? And it was through these tactics that we have listed here. For example, they employed a lot of the tactics from earlier civilizations that they had learned about, kind of like how the Jaredites had found records of something that civilizations in the past had done to control or gain or get power, and they implemented it. This is exactly what Babylon does, but almost in a way of like looking at the best of the best and then becoming very good at this type of dominion. And so they use class warfare, right? They have a priest, a royal elite family line that is kind of in on certain secrets and that they can manage very well so that you can keep things going top down, organized and managed. They had managers of deep finance manipulation. They had a temple palace economy. This is, look that up because there's a lot to unpack with some of these things I'm just throwing out kind of willy-nilly. But like a temple palace economy is what we're striving for essentially in the millennium, by the way, where all of your civilization is like revolves around the temple. This is how temples were anciently. The whole civilization kind of was built around the center temple. And weights and measures, like your value of your money, your monetary system, was dependent on the honesty and integrity of the temple, that it was this divine, honest institution, essentially, that was going to be mitigating the affairs of man. And so when you have a corruption of that, and you still have a temple economy, well, that's when you have a changing of weights and measures, or you have usury, where you're lending and loaning money and stuff that you don't have necessarily. There's a whole lot that they do with deep finance and this is exactly our problem today with the Federal Reserve and the bankers, right? The dirty bankers and all these things. But that's just one arm. That is just one arm of the many tentacles that Babylon uses to dominate and control societies. Finance is very important, yes. But again, that's just like a throwaway arm where they have military, they've got trade and commerce manipulation, they've got spycraft, they institute vassal kings, they use the whole gamut of art of war tactics that you're going to find. Babylon uses them. Ideological warfare. They want to subvert your religion. They'll take your best children and teach them all their rules and then have them go convert your people. Like they will subvert you. That's exactly what Babylon did and does. We read the scriptures, and that's Israel's downfall, is succumbing to a lot of the temptations of these nasty, sneaky ways of Babylon, imposing their will, taxing their people, and taking their money and their goods. So there's a whole lot more on there. I'll just say all of the kingdoms Daniel saw and the things that we have experienced in history. So from Babylon to Persia to Greece to Rome, they all become compounded versions of what, this Babylonian style of rule, each one kind of adding their own style and, new thing to it. And so it just becomes this unruly, ungodly thing here at the end. And that's what John's seeing in his final version with these beasts that are just like crazy, or Daniel's seeing, or Ezra's seeing, and he's terrified of them because they've gone so far beyond righteous dominion that it truly is like the inversion of Zion. It is the Babylon. Once again, it's the tower going up and in need of some divine punishment. So I'm glazing over. We're going to do a giant history gap. And again, we could do like a whole nother podcast just exploring the history of some of this stuff, going through like deep into the Middle Ages and the apostasy and what happens to Rome and their cults and that managerial style of leadership, of initiation and bringing certain people in. How did that go into the Templars or into the Jesuits or the Rosicrucians, into the Freemasons, into the Illuminati, it just passed down and through. So here's the short and fast version just for the slide. Again, just kind of as a big snapshot of how Chris and I think. It's this: the Roman elites essentially moved to Venice upon the downfall and the collapse of Rome. They set up in Venice. This is what Shakespeare's The Merchants of Venice is kind of an allusion to. It's talking to a lot of the politics and their power in Venice and how this elite class from Rome continued to manipulate trade and things from such a small position moving around. They moved from Venice to London and Amsterdam, and from there with the revolution and stuff to Washington, D.C. So again, this Babylon from 600 BC, from, again, going back to Adam, it's ancient. It is well and alive and never left America during the revolution. They were so embedded in Britain, in the English government, and controlling everything at that point. It's naive of us to think we shucked it off completely with the revolution. In fact, Joseph Smith was fighting elements of it during his own day, during Andrew Jackson's day and the Freemasonic infiltrations and the Freemason wars of their day with the anti-Freemason movement and all these other things, especially after Joseph's death. So there's a whole lot going in there that connects all these things like a ligament when you're looking at it with this big grand picture, that we are fighting that same deep state, that same blob is what it's being referred to today. That same mystery Babylon is what John refers to it. Next slide, unless you got some comments.
Anyways, this is a video by Robert Seffer. I know Leiland would tell you he is good, but not great. He misses a lot of stuff, but he gets a lot of stuff right. And it's really about what Leiland was just describing, where you have this nobility and this Roman elite, these secret combinations moving through societies, moving through time, from culture to culture, from central PowerPoint to central PowerPoint until today's world. Sorry, I'm reading your chat right now, guys. Yeah, so yeah, you're saying there is a fall. I know there's a focus from the fall of Rome, but what about World War II? It's just going into all of it, like these secret combinations, and that's kind of the point we're trying to get across. I think is these secret combinations have existed since the beginning of time, and they've established systems to pass on their works and what they're doing through time. So yeah, it went into World War II. It went into World War I. It's in today's world. and you're missing a huge chunk of the picture if you're not taking into account that there's this battle between Babylon and the kingdom of God that's been going on for that long.
Okay. Yeah, I heard what you're saying, and that that's the point I'm trying to get. I know I get long-winded, but it's that these secret combinations are ancient and they do pass down like a plan. Think about how we believe that there's been a plan, and I just laid out this whole timeline of God using Israel by scattering them so meticulously across different places and on the islands of the sea, and that's a plan. That's a definite plan. So if we're doing that, and Satan used to be one of us, basically, like he's got plans. There are plans, and so I think that's the first paradigm shift most people might have a hard time with how we see things. Is that I see things, and I don't know, Chris, maybe you can confirm. I see history as a series of conspiracies. That history is conspiracy. It's not coincidence history. That things happen because men have agency and act. And that there have been, like all the bad things that are happening in our world today, they wouldn't have to happen. We could have the millennium now if men would act according to how Jesus commands, but they don't. So that's where I see that a lot of people fall into like a habit of like excusing it away. I don't know if I'm expressing what I'm trying to say very well.
Yeah, I think Jared Bell asked a question in the chat on X that I think kind of addresses this. So I'll just read it and you can tell me your thoughts. He says, I remember an elder in the MTC described secret combinations as something that is actually written and passed down through generations, ceremonial stuff written down. Is that a fair statement to make?
Well, here's what I'll say, and it's on this slide here. Ezra Taft Benson refers to secret combinations and the secret combination. So you can have secret combinations like your gang down the streets, the Bloods, the Crips, the whatever it is, the mafia would be a secret combination, essentially. Do they write stuff down? Do they pass things down? I don't know. Depends on the family. Depends on, the business. The cartels, right? This is a type of secret society, and it's all around us. And the bigger you go in social orders, you see these types of things that they exist, these secret societies. But the secret society that Ezra Taft Benson refers to and that the Book of Mormon warns us about is a tyrannical group, like you're saying, with rituals and rites and initiations and managing classes that is hell-bent on taking over the world. They have a world-dominating goal. Like they want to take away the freedoms and liberties of all men. That's what the scriptures say. And that they will do it through process of time, that they have it in their head that they will become like the gods of this earth. They will be the new elite during their own manufactured millennium. That's how they interpret like the inverted scriptures. So yeah, definitely the secret combination. It's a passed down thing. It's the rights of Cain, Master Mayhem, like all that going down. But today, who that group is or which ones they are, I don't know. I think we're dealing with lots of layers through the onion publicly. That anybody publicly we're talking about, there are lots of layers to the onion until we get to those types of people we're talking about. But everybody wants those answers. I'm sorry, like they're a secret combination. Like it should be evident in that name, but there are a lot of things that you can see and things we can point to, like the acts that they do, the things that they do, we can see and we can fight against that. And that's what President Benson, I believe, was all about. He was about identifying the secret combination, and he called it specifically communism and socialism of his day, which I would believe it's the same thing. It never went away. They say we beat it in the Cold War. I don't believe that. I believe it went underground and subverted us, just like Satan always does. He doesn't give up. So this is what I see in this slide, is us tying together here now Book of Mormon witness and modern day prophet witness of the secret combination. Because in the Book of Mormon, it does point out over and over again that the different civilizations that lived on this continent, this American continent, all of them, their downfalls were by secret combination, by a group that takes over the government seeking to take over everyone, take away their freedoms and their rights, and to freeload off their efforts.
I'll just add, yeah. So one thing that kind of woke me up to this is Albert Pike. He was one of the top Freemason guys. He wrote a book, and in that book, he describes this belief system they have of the Garden of Eden story being reversed from what we think it is. So he's like Lucifer is the good guy in that story. He's the one who comes to this prison where these people are trapped by this god, and he frees them and gives them knowledge. And reading that perspective made a lot of things click, because before that I'm like, these people can't actually be that evil. But in their minds, they actually are fighting on the good side, you know? And so they really do want to destroy God. It's not just a power thing when you get deep into it. Like, these people believe all of it. They just think the other side is the good side. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, like that's Satanism in the occult is not as it's portrayed in Hollywood in terms of like they run around wearing devil horns. I mean, some of them do, whether it's, you know, the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey and these types of people. But like going back into history, it was a false illumination. It was a quick, it was some truth mixed with the philosophies of men, essentially. Just like the original lie to Eve in the garden, like you're saying, that it's Lucifer appearing as an angel of light. Because again, here's a point, and Orthodox and other Christians, this is what they bang us on or hit us with, ding us with, that we believe that Jesus and Lucifer were premortal brothers, that we're all premortal brothers with this guy, and that he was a high command angel. Think of him that way, that he was of high position, up there enough to challenge Jehovah in terms of, you know, for the throne. And he was rejected for rebellion. It was rebellion. It was outright rebellion. And this is a real emotion. And to us, like, it makes sense. It fits within the grand plan that he's the opposition in all things that's come down here to allow us to be tempted, allow us to make decisions for ourselves or to follow his plan, right? So this is kind of his big shot to pull as many of us away to his side. But he uses the same tactics, inversion, like you said, appearing as an angel of light, saying that he's the illuminated one. So in the end of these high-ranking initiations and these managerial classes through the modern day, you know, Babylonian cults, whatever they are today, you know, whatever it's, if it's the Boule of the Black Freemasons or if it's something else, right? And they get you into these higher levels and initiate you. They're teaching you some secrets about how we're all pawns to them, how Lucifer is the true good guy, that it's not Jesus, that he's the demiurge, and it's all reversed, like you're saying. So yeah, and that's how it's so convincing to them, because they're like, oh, that's why the Christians and the Crusades and this and that, and it's easy to blame everything else on the Abrahamic religions and things like that when you see the Old Testament God Jehovah as being the bad guy, and that's kind of where all that goes to. So it's a corruption. I mean, it's exactly what we should be expecting, though. If you've got people that are convinced of something, it's got to be close to the truth, but something's off. And that's definitely like the granddaddy of all granddaddies, is swapping God for the devil. So you have the Book of Mormon warning us of secret combinations, and not just about past civilizations that were infiltrated and destroyed by them, but also pointing forward to us, knowing that that book would be in our hands through the restoration by prophecy, and knowing that our time, we would suffer the same things. They wrote about this and they warned us. So the Book of Mormon truly is for our time, and it's showing exactly what's going on today when we incorporate those ideas of secret combinations and a secret tyrannical government trying to rule the world and taking away our freedoms. And perhaps they've subverted our government for over 100 years. That's what Ezra's Eagle prophecy is going to suggest, right? That it's a beautiful thing when we can follow the prophet and realize that despite their tyranny, despite their efforts to destroy us, despite their assassination of prophets in these latter days, despite all of that, the church is growing in numbers, and they're going to have to take a really public stance against us moving forward. And this is going to be the grinding stone. This is going to be like a huge trial where people are going to either choose the security of an all-encompassing Big Daddy tyrannical government, or sticking to our guns with what the prophets like Ezra Taft Benson have been telling us. I mean, not just Ezra Taft Benson, go back to Moses writing about Genesis and Cain and Abel. Like this has been in the program from the beginning. So I belabored that a lot, but one more point that kind of supports all of this idea of the secret combination is in Doctrine and Covenants section 38, in those scriptures there that I've got listed, 12 through 13 and 28 through 29. This is where the Lord is telling Joseph Smith unequivocally in 1831 that the enemy was already combined against him and plotting in secret chambers, and we knew it not. And that it was through process of time that they were going to unravel our downfall. So again, so the people who are like not so conspiratorial minded, or maybe might push back against a conspiratorial version of history, this is in our scriptures, that how can in 1831 the enemy be combined if you don't accept that there are secret combinations that are seeking tyranny over the entire world? I see you pulled it up.
Okay, so I was just saying you were lagging a little bit there, so I just wanted to read it in case anyone missed it. Um, I'll just read it right now. So, starting in verse 12, which causeth silence to reign, and all eternity is pained, and the angels are waiting the great command to reap down the earth, to gather the tares, that they may be burned, and behold, the enemy is combined. And now I show unto you a mystery, a thing which is had in secret chambers, to bring to pass even your destruction in process of time, and ye knew it not. And then you go down to 28 and 29. And again I say unto you that the enemy in the secret chambers seeketh your lives. Ye hear of wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries, but ye know not the hearts of men in your own land. So, I mean, that's just proof. Back then, God is straight up saying they're already combined against you. These things, they're already there.
And it's liberating to take that view, because then you don't have to feel like, oh, we've got to build this perfect society and glide into the millennium. But that everything the prophet said, we can take confidence that it's real, that all nations will fall, just like Babylon saw, that a stone cut from the mountain or without hands, which is the kingdom of God, which is the restored church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, will stand up and destroy all nations, or will be the cause of their destruction. It will be through the righteousness of our people, and all people who choose to follow Jesus Christ. I think they will run to our tents, our stakes, our wards, and see our networks of love and care and ability to live a discipled life despite the perils going on around us. I think that's our strength, leaning into that. That's why I see wisdom in what President Nelson is doing right now. Instead of trying to unravel all of these secret combinations and educate everybody, no. The safest mode for our people, who are a global people with so many different governments and different positions of being subverted, right? That it is a focus on Christ, on the temple, on our covenant relationship, and seeking to build a Zion-like people through righteousness. That this is the goal. This is the goal of the gathering. He sees it clearly. He hasn't but spoken on it almost every single time he talks about the gathering of Israel. That it's the most important thing we're doing right now. And he's so focused on a Zion, living a higher, holier life. He sees this big picture. He knows that the answer to these secret combinations is our righteousness, is living the commandments that God has set out before us. So Ezra Taft Benson calls them out explicitly. Go on to the next one. There's a lot of talks from Ezra Taft Benson that people can search up. He's a heavy hitter here, but I mean, other past prophets have spoken out against communism as well, being the weapon used by this secret combination to uproot the liberties and freedoms of all men. So it's not just an Ezra Taft Benson thing, but again, we're trying to show that this is an ancient Jesus thing. It's a prophecy thing.
Just before I go to the next slide, Adam had a good point that it's not just all nations, it's also all the institutions that are not built upon Christ. Anything not built upon Christ is coming to an end.
Didn't President Nelson in his recent address talk about that? About no other institutions have the power to do what the church does, essentially? I'm butchering it, but that's an astute point. That's what it makes me think of.
Yeah, he did. You're right.
So that's true. And that's another paradigm breaker. You've got to stop believing that the institutions of our government have your best interest at heart, or that they're honest, or that the media is honest, or that anybody is being honest that has a financial interest in this day and age. Like, that's the truth. So again, not to like beat this dead horse, but we're going to. Almost every episode we're going to have to talk about this. I know it. But like, you can see who the secret combination is based on everything we just talked about. Take the prophet's words seriously. That Ezra Taft Benson was already pointing to places that we can go to get information, to educate ourselves and see through all the lies and deception, to see what are the organizations, what are the controls, the laws, the actions, the historical events that are occurring that are in line with these secret combinations we should be expecting. Here they are, guys. Like President Benson stated 3 books in the talk that was on the previous page, where he says, None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen. Everyone should read. He highly recommends it. Also, The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen. Again, kind of an expose on what communism is and how it's used by these mystery elite, the mystery Babylon, to overthrow governments and to implement tyranny. And then the third was the writing or document on communism from David O. McKay and things like that. He said, educate yourself on those 3 things and you'll see the secret combination plainly. Now, within that book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, it points plainly to the Council on Foreign Relations, to the Trilateral Commission, to the FBI, the CIA, the United Nations, all of these groups that we see today being called out as the deep state. Well, we as Latter-day Saints, we should be the most conspiratorial minded and be like egging this on, like, yeah, finally somebody else is noticing. Finally. But that's not the reaction that we're seeing from Latter-day Saints. Because again, we're still caught up in Babylon. We're still caught up in Egypt. And so people don't want to be offended by the popular social zeitgeist of Babylon or Egypt. And so they hesitate to say what is obvious, that these things that our prophets have pointed out to, they're ringing true. 70 years later, 50 years later, look at what these organizations have done to embroil us in endless wars, an endless surveillance state, an endless stripping of our rights. This is where it goes. So again, educating yourself on these fundamental things that prophets have said, they give you the foresight and the vision to see with prophetic lenses through all of the propaganda and noise of today. Now, it's hard. Propaganda is really good. The devil's really good at tricking us, 100%. So I'm not saying it's easy, guys. I'm saying it takes effort. But we shouldn't be wondering, like, where do we need to go to find information to arm ourselves with this kind of knowledge? It's been given to us over and over again. And I believe that's why the prophets for the last 20 years haven't been saying much about this kind of stuff, is because it wasn't received very well by the members of the church. Kind of like the proclamation on the family, how it was kind of like a big whoopsie, who cares in 1995, but look at it now. Apply that same principle that we use a lot with the family proclamation to these messages and warnings from Ezra Taft Benson, from David O. McKay, from all of the prophets prior, even Joseph Smith. Behold, the enemy is combined and seeketh your lives in secret chambers. Like, as soon as you accept that and get past the initial shock, the initial fear, the initial rage, the initial anger, the initial feeling of being used and lied to by institutions that have if essentially enforced your trust through taxation, through social credit, through whatever it might be, you're okay to feel angry. You're okay to go through that. But know that you've got to work through that, and you will. And you'll break through that, and you'll all of a sudden see things very clear, and you won't be deceived. And you'll find yourself spending less time listening to the news on the way home, because you'll see that it enrages you for no reason at all. They're not talking about the important things. They're spinning you to get you divided on a race relationship, or this stupid case here, or is pineapple on pizza good? Like, they just want you spending your time, wasting your energy, so you don't see all the things happening behind the curtain. So there's a lot more text on this slide, but I think I kind of riffed through it without even seeing it. If you want to hit some buttons.
My bad. I'll just point out too, I think it may have actually been Adam and Tanner who talked about it on Spiritual Arson back in the day, that it seems as though the time between the prophets and apostles saying something and that thing happening is getting shorter and shorter. Yeah. Which is interesting as we move into some of this stuff that's going on. And then Jared asked another question. At what point do you think in America's history did everything change for America? I would personally say it was when the Council of Foreign Relations popped up, but I'd be curious what you have to say.
When they killed the prophet Joseph Smith and Hiram, I would say that was the turning point.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fair. Nope, that's fair. Well, that's the right answer.
I think Joseph, he was doing the right thing. The Constitution was written by inspired men and was written so that Zion could be gathered. But what the government had been doing was not upholding their end of the bargain. And there was no redress for the saints in their persecutions out of Missouri and out of Nauvoo and out of all of the places moving west, right? We were persecuted, and then we were captured by that government. So I think the downfall was the secret combinations, again, in these hidden chambers since 1831 and before, who found Joseph Smith and what he was doing as a major threat to their plans to uproot the Constitution. So I think plans were laid through Freemasonic lodges and things like that at the time. Not saying all Freemasons are bad. Anybody who's read my threads and things knows that's not what I'm saying, but I'm going to state it, for the new people. Like, that's not what I'm saying. This is how the Mystery Babylon operates. It corrupts institutions. It corrupts them and uses them selfishly. That's all Satan can do, right? So I think that's the good answer, is that when they killed Joseph Smith, that's when it changed. Because after that, you have, there's all these banking wars that happened, the banking wars of the 1800s. At the same time, you have all the disciples of the dispensation of deceit gaining popularity. Charles Darwin, Karl Marx is like receiving his satanic revelations at these times. Like, all of these people, Satan is lifting up and putting into positions of power. While also in our American economy, guess who's rising to industry power as well? Our monopoly barons. Our JP Morgans, our Carnegies, our Rockefellers, right? These men are growing their wealth during this wicked period of the 1800s, where they're abusing men, abusing Chinese workers, immigrants, all kinds of things. to make a quick buck on the expansionism, right? And these guys get swept up in the same occult guys that are running politics. And when you combine economy and politics, that's how they get their foot in the early 1900s. With Teddy Roosevelt being a little corrupt and too close to some questionable figures in the communist ideology, if you guys want to look into that. Like, all of this happens early 1900s, where you let these robber barons mate with the government. And then they institute the Federal Reserve. Read the book, The Creature of Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. That's going to expose those same players, these economic heavy hitters, who are starting to say, let's buy government. And so they start the process of influencing government candidates, funding things, lobbying starts then, like all of this to get their industry in with government so that they could then militarize it and enforce their monopolies by military. That's what eventually evolves into, with the CFR, entanglement in foreign relations. We start to go to all kinds of wars. Our military gets beefed up, and then we become the gladio. We become the Roman sword, the edge of the blade for this blob, this oligarchy. And now our name is tarnished. Our name is mud. America is not what the founding fathers wanted it to be, but a tool of this blob. And now they're brainwashing all the kids to think that it was always this way and that we've always been evil and that we're the baddies. Well, there's some truth to that, but it's not us. It's the subversive, nasty secret combinations. It's the wicked priests of Noah. It's these people who come in and take over maliciously. And so that's how I see it. So long answer, but 1844. After Joseph declares running for president, because he's like challenging all the candidates. Hey, what are you going to do for the Mormons? What are you going to do for the Latter-day Saints? What are you going to do for all of this stuff? And they said, nothing. Sorry, can't help you. Well, he said, okay, I'm running for president then. And here's what I'm running on. Blah, 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 blah. And then boom, he ends up dead. So I think that's the turning point. When America killed prophets, their judgment was set. We can continue on, Chris, unless there's more questions. Okay.
All right. You ready to pop to the next one?
Yeah, we're almost at a good stopping point, guys. So like, don't feel overwhelmed yet. We're just kind of setting up, again, the perspective of how we see these things. So this is where we're going to bring in Ezra's eagle, just to reinforce everything we've already been talking about. Because you have Ezra, just like Daniel, who's a political prophet, essentially, called to lead and guide and bring Israel back through certain time periods, right? And he sees this vision of latter-day America. There are lots of great videos that you can go out and watch that try to interpret and speculate on what it is. I have one as well with a good friend, Ryan. You can find on my YouTube channel. It's still valid, still good. Made it a year and a half, 2 years ago, but we're still waiting on the next moment to drop, right? I don't want to go into all the details with my Miro board at the moment, my schizo board. I have this like timeline whiteboard that has like everything mapped out, like it's just like the meme, but we don't have to explore that there. But this is, so we just talked about like the CFR. You mentioned the CFR coming in and taking over. I would say the CFR moving into position was when our presidency, like there was no hope for the presidency after that, because they had attached themselves to top administrative positions of influence, of power, of money, that kind of stuff through World War I, that their influence was ubiquitous, and it was going to happen with like through dirty tricks or not. So yeah, the CFR is when the presidency, I believe, was captured. But I think America as a working system, like with different organs, whether it's our economy or social or our education or these types of things, it was taken over long, like the heart of America was taken over long before the presidencies were completely captured. And I think Ezra's eagle points to the point when the presidencies are completely captured. And you have this series of the plans, like Joseph Smith is told there by the Lord, of them laying out these plans in secret chambers through process of time, through different world wars. They would expand their control, their reach, their power, and they would use us like a bludgeoning axe to chop down the tree of humanity. And so I don't know if we want to go all the way into Ezra's eagle right now. What do you think, Chris? I want to get your opinion and make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah, such a rabbit hole. I'm like, if we could do it quickly, like give a quick overview, I think it's worth it. I don't know if I'm capable of giving a quick overview of Ezra's eagle.
Yeah. I'm like proven not to give a quick overview. That's why I'm hesitating to do it. Here's what we'll say is that looking forward to the future, we will interpret a lot of what's going on this year, especially with this election. In fact, look it up. This year, you have more political elections going on across the nations of the world, more than have ever been in 1 year at one time. So this year is like year of political upheaval. And in this prophecy, it goes through a timeline of how our presidents are subverted by these three sleeping heads of this eagle. right? So these three heads have captured the presidencies, and it goes all the way from starting with Herbert Hoover, going up through the presidents all the way to Barack Obama on one side being controlled. And then all of a sudden it says, then the disposition of the presidents changes at that point, and it switches to the opposite side of the wing. And each of the presidents who rule on this side of the wing think to rule for themselves and kind of throw a wrench into the plans of the three eagle heads and become a liability. In the prophecy, this happens before we get to this point of like Donald Trump is what I'm referring to. He comes through, he's the liability to this new plan. He comes through with this radical ideology that is not aligned with the Council on Foreign Relations and the world global move that has grown into. Because the Council on Foreign Relations is just one group, but its people, its ideas, its seeds, its managers, they go out into all these other groups and they form new organizations, and those things get big and they bloat. That's the blob. That's the deep state. It's this permanent bureaucracy of ideologues that keep things going no matter who's elected. Like, that's the whole idea. And when you have that many people in your ear close up, like, it doesn't matter who you elect to be president, they're going to have somebody whispering in their ear something that Mystery Babylon wants them to do, or else. And the or else is proven with guys like John F. Kennedy or Richard Nixon or even Ronald Reagan, who was shown with a bullet that he needed to get in line, right? He was shot after he was opposing some of these foreign influence policies and things like that. Or it was money. It was the gold standard. It was something. It was one of these strings of the tentacle, or one of these arms of the octopus, of the Hydra, that these presidents threaten, and they become a liability. And the eagle heads pluck them up. They make them short feathers. They remove them from office. Donald Trump was one. Joe Biden is where we're at now. He's prophesied to be removed sooner than Donald Trump. Well, the window of that happening has closed for us. Like, we are now within what? We're in May, 5, 6, 7 months away from like the deadline for this, that Joe Biden's got to be removed sooner than Donald Trump was. And he was removed by a fraudulent election, by them stealing the election, and by just like an internal coup, his whole presidency, this deep state. It's now proven, and everybody's going to dispute that. Where's your source, your links, or whatever? Like, again, zoom out and see this picture. See that every single secret combination, adjacent organization and person of influence, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, all these guys, the Bushes, they're all tied to these secret combinations. And who was their enemy number one? It was Donald J. Trump, right? It was this short feather, this guy who sought to reign and do things a little bit differently, this populist movement that was opposing a globalist movement where they had things like all in line. And he touched every single one of those keys on the piano, whether it was economy, whether it was their social engineering, whether it was their propaganda and his fake news campaign, or other operations, psychological operations that he might have used to battle against the eagle heads. And he became a liability. Now, it says he's never to return again. So again, my perspective this year is that a lot of the hullabaloo about following what's going on with Donald Trump and Joe Biden is kind of just like not there for me. I just don't care, because I am expecting that something different is going to happen before we get to that point. It's clear that the Democrats and that whole system is tied to the blob. They've sold their souls to be a part of the system of Mystery Babylon, and that they will do and stop at nothing to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get elected. Are they going to be able to steal the vote again for Joe Biden this time around after his 4 years? Are they going to say that he got 100 million votes this time? Like, what are they going to do? It's going to become so ridiculous that it'll be like, this is a slow awakening for everybody who finally is like, year after year, okay, now I see this. Then this event happens. Okay, now I see this. To me, it's a grand mercy. But it's so frustrating for people who have been watching for a long time and expecting things to kind of happen a little sooner. So that's kind of where we're at. I know that's not a short Ezra's Eagle type of summation, but the end of the prophecy is actually really good.
It's short for Ezra's Eagle.
True. And I always forget the best part, which is the end, where these heads take over. They end up killing each other. Then they basically spawn war on the earth, and then the eagle is burned. But before that happens, they're rebuked by a lion. Again, this plays into a Watchman, right? What does the Watchman respond when he's asked? But a lion. And then he tells of how Babylon has fallen. And in Ezra's Eagle, this lion comes out and rebukes the Antichrist, rebukes this eagle, and calls it essentially the remnants of Babylon. He says, aren't you that fourth beast that Daniel spoke of? And he has to admit, yes. Okay, so this is where it all comes together for us and why we believe in these things so much. It's not just hope. It's not hopium. It's to see things as they are and to believe the prophets and to have faith in Jesus Christ, that he will throw down all these nations, that it will be miraculous because it will seem like a stone cut from the mountain without hands. Like, that's impossible. How does that happen? That's how this is. It will be impossible to watch how the nations fall, yet how God's kingdom rises despite the persecution. It might seem like we lose for a while. It's going to seem like we don't know what we're doing, but God does, and God's leading and guiding us, and that's the promise. And at the end of Ezra's eagle, it says, after the eagle is burned, after America probably goes through some war on our territory, probably goes through some maybe a second civil war, like a prophet once maybe suggested, perhaps, right? Maybe that's what happens. But then afterwards, what happens? The prophecy says that the eagle is restored unto its original self, essentially. And the 10 tribes return, and they help. They help in the process of chasing out the Antichrist and also restoring America back to its bounteous waves of grain, its beauty, its constitution of freedom, its ability to host Zion, the kingdom of God. So Ezra's eagle is extremely hopeful if you're seeing it in the big picture, if you're seeing the whole point of prophecy. Now, we're all human. And even Ezra, after he saw this vision, he collapses and he's sick for days and he's just like beside himself and asking the Lord, why are you showing me these things? And so I understand that it can kind of be hard to confront these things like initially. But as you do, you start to see news like conform itself to the prophecies, and it bolsters your testimony even more. It has for me, at least that's my witness. I'm done with this slide, Chris, if you want to move on or if you have comments.
I will just say, mathematically, if you look at the odds of Ezra's eagle lining up the way it has from our perspective, I would say it's like the mainstream perspective of Ezra's eagle at this point. If you look at that and the way the short feathers and the long feathers have lined up, it's like virtually impossible. So there is more than just us guessing. Like the way it's lined up over the last, 60 years or so is almost mathematically impossible. Like it's such a big number that it might as well be impossible. So it's interesting as we're like right at the end of it. Another
critical, like, maybe it's what's the word that Terrence Howard kept using? Another critical linchpin in understanding this is the prophet right around the time that Donald Trump is experiencing the onslaught from fake news and the blob, which is called the deep state. He's in mid-conflict, mid-warfare with the deep state and trying to change a lot of the globalist ideas back to a more constitutional-centric rule. I'm not saying he's like Mr. Constitution, but I'm saying he's not doing the socialism, communism they were wanting. And so he's a liability to them. Well, at the same time, we're seeing this transition from the one side of the wing of the eagle to the other. What is our prophet saying? Like, what happened at the dedication of Rome? What was M. Russell Ballard talking about in terms of politics? What has Dallin H. Oaks been talking about in terms of the Constitution and the ability of the voice of the people needing to be heard according to the Constitution? That's not happening right now with this eagle. That's not happening with our votes. That's not happening with any redress that we have against a corrupted government and their abuses of power over us. Just look at COVID. Look how they overstepped their constitutional bounds. This is an evidence. But even before that was happening, our prophets were saying at Rome that we are at a crossroads, not only in the history of the church and for its growth and its exponential rise as Zion through all this garbage, but in the world, that world governments were at a crossroads. And that fits exactly with Ezra's eagle as well, from a transition from everything being in order according to Mystery Babylon to all of a sudden, they're getting some hiccups and some pushback by some short, stubborn feathers that are throwing some wrenches in their plan. That's what we're witnessing. That's what we're watching. And it's about to get really scary for people. So I think the point of belaboring, like talking about this so much and seeing it everywhere and thinking about it a lot is that when these things do happen, you and us and all of the people who listen and are aware of these things are going to become a helpmate for all of the people confused and not knowing where to do, what to turn to. And they might be freaking out, having a hard time. You can comfort them. You can tell them what's going on, and not just because of your speculations, but show them in the scriptures. Go back to Daniel, go to John, go to Amos, go to all of them and point to the wonderful things that follow this hard trial of all the nations collapsing. The end, I promise. I've said like 3 times that's the end of this slide, but for reals this time.
So good.
Okay, this is worth note. So since World War II, and I would say the rise of globalism, if you want my take, America didn't win World War II. America won the right to be the hammer and sickle of the oligarchy. That each one of the world wars, and even our Civil War, was instigated and played both sides by the oligarchy. Both sides are funded by the oligarchy. Both sides are pitted against each other. This is the Hegelian dialectic, another vocab word that we'll probably be referring to a lot in the future. But that's something that, again, if you're diving into conspiracy, into how do these people manage us, how do they trick us, how do they deceive us, you got to study the Hegelian dialectic in terms of them presenting, let's just this example, they present you two false binaries. You're either for Israel or you're for Palestine. You're either for Ukraine or you're for Russia. And if not, you're canceled, right? That's a false binary. That's a false dichotomy. They're trying to pitch you against each other. They're presenting two options and forcing you into a corner, essentially, right? They use that everywhere on everything in multiple ways. And so after World War II, let me get back to the slide instead of my tangent there. But you have, what is the opposite of globalism, right? What is the opposite of this expansion into a one world tyrannical government? Well, the push against that is usually manifested in a populist movement, in a popular movement or a national movement. Again, this isn't saying like national movements can be abused. Populist movements can be abused. All these political movements can be abused, and they are. They're all subverted, ultimately. This list here is proof, where you have, after the World War II, during the Cold War, you had the rise of John Birch Society. Even before that, John Birch Society, and they're essentially like propaganda against propaganda. It's propaganda wars, info wars, essentially, trying to find out who done it, spy versus spy, and really trying to dig into this stuff, like kind of like we're doing now. John Birch Society was a populist movement pushing against communism and socialism, but they didn't really do their thing unless we're watching products of some long game that they've been planning as well, which could be. The Tea Party movement is the next one that I remember. I'm sure there were some in the 90s and 80s, but that was when I was born, and I was more involved in Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles and other things than the populist, political movements. So, but the Tea Party movement was another one. It was another one of these constitutional, like kind of centered philosophies or ideologies that was pushing against or pushing back what we're identifying as Mystery Babylon, this coercive, slow creep socialism, right? And then after that, and you have the Tea Party movement that gets kind of squashed and infiltrated, and all bedsurrection on them as well. Like it happens every time. They use the same tactics, and it happened again with MAGA, with Make America Great Again. Again, this America First movement, it's again focusing back on the Constitution and away from globalist principles, and it gets demonized. It gets demonized as actual Nazism, which is ironic because I would argue that this hegemonic force has been using Nazism essentially on us ever since World War II, that the Nazis won, that they didn't lose, and that the Nazis are in our government, that the Nazis are part of the CIA, Operation Paperclip. Look these things up, where we essentially assimilated all of the Nazi scientists into our programs, the ones running NASA, the ones having military contracts, the ones doing technologies that are black budget and off the books, right? These are all a continuation of the same nasty people behind all of the world wars. And so that's how I see things, that we're still fighting the same enemy. It's a cancer that doesn't go away. It's a hydra. You cut off one head and 10 come back, or 7, or I can't remember the numbers, 2. So these populist movements are like a response where we talk about for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, or for everything there is an opposite. This is kind of the organic response in a pendulum swing. As they push for socialism, you're going to have a pushback. As they push for communism, you have a pushback. As they push for soft Marxism now, you have a pushback. And that's what we're seeing. But it's so extreme at this point that we are fighting each other over the stupidest of things, gender norms, this type of stuff. Like we have been demoralized. And this is exactly the plan of communist subversives, insurrectionists. This is what they do, is they demoralize us. They take away our morals, our understandings. And we could probably move on to the next slide I think it's Yuri Bezmenov. And if not, I'm wrong. Yeah. So we won't watch the videos. I encourage everybody to go watch them though. Watch. He's a defector from Russia, from from the Soviet Union. He defected, and he was like a head boss manager for KGB and stuff over India. Okay. So yeah, same dirty tricks of them infiltrating and stuff. They do it all over the country. We just talk about America right now, but man, we could talk about the fruit movements in South America and the CIA operations, drug running down there, and what they've done to governments and things like that. So like, it's all over the world. They've been doing this for centuries, for ages, like we said. But this guy, he defects in the 80s, and he's telling us exactly what has basically transpired over the last 40 years. That their way of changing our perspective, of allowing them to take away our freedoms, is exactly like we pointed out an hour ago with Babylon's tactics in the beginning, through ideological subversion, to subvert your beliefs and to supplant them with their own version of it. And so he calls it active measures. or psychological warfare, right? And you're in the middle of it. This is, I think, our show is an attempt to get into that fight, to push back against this psychological manipulation from all sides, and to insert a prophetic take, or at least our attempt at that. So he says there are 4 phases that a society goes through until they are totally corrupt into the communist system or conspiracy. 1, demoralization, and then they destabilize you. Think about 9/11 and then our war on terror and the Patriot Act and all these things being a product of destabilization, and everything else since then. COVID especially is the most recent, I would say, evident action of destabilization by a world tyranny. And then you have crisis. There you have COVID and everything else wrapped in there. World War III on the brink of it now. All these are crises that they are pushing people to. And then once you've got the disorder out of your crises, your world war or your civil war or whatever you've caused, your revolution, well, then there's normalization, where we implement the new rules that we already had prepared long before you had this crisis. That's the nature of the blob. That's the nature of the secret combination. That's what Ezra Taft Benson was saying was already embedded in our government while he was working there as a cabinet member in the Department of Agriculture. So this is how it all ties together. That seeing how this has blossomed and fruited just since Yuri Bezmenov's testimony and witness here, it's unreal. It, to me, strengthens my testimony in Ezra Taft Benson. He was the prophet when I was born, so I have a special connection to him, I think, too. That's it for that slide. Perfect. And then I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's kind of self-evident as well. Like once you take this paradigm, all of these guys are in on it, right? So just for context, I've got Gerald Ford up here, CIA. He was on the Warren Commission, which was, the thing put together after JFK's assassination. He had an affair with an FBI agent. Like he was not a beacon of righteousness either, and so likely corrupted or blackmailed or in the club. Who knows? A lot of these guys too, I don't think they're all the ones signing the papers and doing the rituals. I think a lot of them are just boxed in by blackmail. That's what Epstein is. He's a giant honeypot operation for some intelligence organization. Likely Mossad is the rumor, right? Israeli intelligence. But this is not new. This is what they were doing back in Babylon's day, right? You leverage information on people. Jimmy Carter, also a member of the Trilateral, or he was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Zbigniew Brzezinski. When you get into conspiracy and the deep state and looking into who the big players are pushing things in top administrative positions in the government, this guy was top offender in terms of bringing in the blob ideology into our government, like entrenching us more with the secret combination. His daughter is actually Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe and NBC or whatever. So again, a key figure in media who is a heavy political influence, like social engineering person. Like this is how they do it. So Jimmy Carter's got that guy up his sleeve, and also his Secretary of State was CFR member Cyrus Vance. So this is how you find, like, they're not all members of the CFR. They're not all members of Skull and Bones or what it might be, but who are their advisors? Who are the people making international foreign affairs decisions? Who are the ones making policies for economy and weights and measures and things like that? Those kind of things are what everybody is like loses sight of when we focus on cult of personality type talking points and commentary. Ronald Reagan, he was also controlled, intimidated. He was an actor, like literally, like Zelensky in Ukraine. So again, fit him to your mold. He was also a known occultist. And I say occultist in that he was good friends with Manly P. Hall, known like historian for Freemasons, Rosicrucians. And he's kind of the one, if you want to know this inverted perspective of Luciferianism and how they see themselves portraying or building a millennium after their own golden age, right? He writes about that extensively. One book is like The Secrets of America or The Destiny of America is what I would recommend if you wanted to read a Manly P. Hall book. But Reagan was friends with him, met with him all the time, and loved his work. So again, suspect guy there with weird ideas that he would go along with, a bigger plan in play for that type of vision. So you have George H.W. Bush, again, former CIA director, likely involved in Kennedy's assassination and lots of other things, but Skull and Bones member of the military-industrial complex, oil baron, like straight up checks every box, right? Bill Clinton, same guy, grew up gangster, man. This guy's like cartel man coming up in Arkansas. Also, the Clinton Foundation is just so corrupt. Like, wait till stuff starts coming out about Haiti and the Red Cross and all things that they're tied to. It's disgusting. We'll talk about like the abusing of kids and the things like that. Bill and Hillary Clinton are some of the biggest tools of the devil to bring in things like the LGBTQ agenda or normalization of that type of stuff. When we're talking about demoralization, they were the ones that really made that happen, really, and abortion and that kind of stuff as well. Like they really made the government a heavy mover in that social re-engineering. So the Clintons are evil and nasty. And I recommend Jonathan Cahn's book, The Old Gods. I think one of them where he's mentioning and goes through and compares a lot of these presidents, evil presidents, to wicked kings in Israel and ancient Israel and things, and wicked characters of the Old Testament. They seem to be playing the archetype in these latter days. It's pretty cool. So I would recommend that. And then you have Barack Obama as well. This guy is just, I'll just say it, he's just like a CIA spook from the womb. He was a Manchurian candidate by the intelligence communities is the way that I see him. And an Alinsky community organizer. Like that's how he came up in politics. There's too much. There's too much on Barack Obama. And maybe we have an episode on that where we just kind of go into how these people are tied to the blob kind of thing. How I see them as members of Mystery Babylon or pawns of it. So just some pictures of all of them down here, buddy. And I know that's not a big deal to see pictures of people together. That happens. But especially these guys unifying against Donald Trump in a lot of policies and stuff, at least all the ones that were alive now or in the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. It's been like 8 years now since Donald Trump came in. So like they've just shown their colors to be good little feathers for the eagle, essentially. So that's kind of what this rundown was, that since post-Kennedy and Nixon, who were the first short feathers in the Ezra's eagle thing, this is just kind of a glimpse at how these succeeding presidents were corrupt by the secret combination, or at least by association. And there's a lot more, like I said, that we could go into there. What else we got?
And
are we almost done?
A good point was made in the chat that in 2016 they would have loved to have a Bush versus Clinton. They tried to push Jeb, but Trump obviously threw a wrench in all of that.
Deadbeat Jeb. What did he call him? It was one of the best insults. No, low energy
Low
Jeb.
energy.
It was something like low energy Jeb. Yeah. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
and even the Bushyites that were still in office sabotaging Trump while he was in there, like John McCain's or the what's the Ryan guy? Not Jack Ryan. He's a character.
Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan. Yeah, the Paul Ryans of the world, the uniparty Republicans, the rhinos, right? All those guys are part of the club too. And it doesn't matter, like, again, who your president is, because you have so many pushers that are in positions, bureaucratic positions, like unelected positions or elected positions, but that will sabotage you left and right. They will infiltrate you. They will subvert you. They will do things in one room and then turn their back on you in another. So it's not an easy thing to go in there and clean. Like if he's like promising clean the swamp, nobody's surprised that he didn't do it in the first 4 years. But I think we haven't seen the end of Donald Trump's attempt at that. Personally, I think how we will see him exit the scene is when that is his grand reveal of his counterpunch. I think that's his campaign for this year, is to kind of counterpunch his finishing in the swamp. I think he planned that they might subvert him and have Joe Biden in office, and that maybe has given him too much credit. But I don't think it's him alone, but whoever is sponsoring him, behind him, and associated with the military. So yeah, and why do I think that? Because we are living in the greatest times, in the most important nation, in terms of we're the last one standing for freedom in all of mankind at the moment. So it's either we collapse and the evil wins, or there's some type of fight, and evil has to earn it. And that's what the scriptures say. There will be a fight. It's not just that evil wins overwhelmingly, but that they have to fight in blood and horror and rain and terror. They have to induce terror. And that's what the first eagle head does, if I'm not mistaken, in Ezra's prophecy. He puts the whole world in terror more than anybody else before, because everybody's starting to wake up and their normal tricks don't work. So whatever this first eagle head does, it's going to terrify the world. And so that's where I think talking about it is very important, so that we're not caught off foot.
That's something I've noticed in the news with so many things that are happening. It's just becoming more and more obvious that the eagle is losing control, and it's going to have to do something extraordinary to get it back.
What's next, Chris?
I think we hit that.
Yeah, we're pretty good there. They're just trying to divide us from within. Okay. I think we can stop here, at least for the general intro, because with this kind of framework, we can see how we might be interpreting what's going on in the news today, right? With this type of framework, maybe revisit your thoughts about COVID and how that happened. Was it organic, or was it a plot and ploy to remove somebody from office? That how convenient during an election year that you have this worldwide pandemic that now we're finding is tied to perhaps intelligence, right? Perhaps Anthony Fauci, who's a part of this globalist blob, this tyranny, the WEF, the WEC, like all of these are involved. This is the blob making its next move. And I think that's why I feel confident now in 2024 to like more openly talk about this stuff. Whereas even 4 years ago, before COVID, we would not be able to make this podcast or talk about these things, I think, in the same spirit. And so I think it's a testament and a witness to the work everyone is doing to educate themselves and find out, who's lying to me and who's not, but also the acceleration of things happening, like we've mentioned before, not just between when the prophet warns and then when we see like the fruits of that, but even like fake news stories where you see the news media try and push some type of narrative, but then within hours, sometimes, days, sometimes hours, it's debunked by people just already being aware of their dirty tricks. So we're definitely living in a new wild, wild west when it comes to information. And it's, in my mind, the culmination of this psychological war that has been waged on us for centuries, thousands of years. But more earnestly here in America, post World War II, I would say they amped everything up. Post 9/11, one more step higher. Post Donald Trump, they've cranked it to the max. Now COVID 2020, they're going to try anything. So that's where like we're saying here at the end, being prepared for whatever this first Eaglehead does. Well, that's why we're here on the Dwelt platform, right? That's why we're here talking about making plans and being prepared and having a network of community, like-minded people to rely on. Now, if you don't have the resources to jump in on Dwelt right now with the emergency preparedness side of things, at least dive into the understanding side of it, this narrative warfare side of it. Educate yourself on these things. Go back to the scriptures we referenced, or the talks from President Benson, or the books. Read them, dive into them, pour into them, and then look at the landscape today and say, who's following these patterns? Who is it? Who's on whose side, right? It starts to become pretty obvious. Now, I like to dive into where it's not obvious, like the Alex Joneses of the world, or the Tucker Carlsons, right? Because they seem to be disseminating good bits of truth, but also interspersed with things that don't quite sit right, or things that smell a little funny to me, right? And so you start to wonder, are they what's called controlled opposition, where you have somebody in there that spills the beans, but not all of it. And so they capture your attention on certain things and then guide you down a certain pathway. They capture your attention. I like to talk about that stuff. I think in future episodes, we will debate and talk about a lot of that in terms of who's a good source to get news from. So I don't know if my internet's
we may
dying.
have just lost Leiland entirely.
Yeah.
Wait a second. See if he comes back. We're right at the end. We really are, like the very end, wrapping up. He may be back. Hold on. Nope, not quite yet. Well, that may be it. That may be it for episode 1. The live stream, a little rough. Thanks for bearing with us. The finished version will be much better with the way it's recorded. We'll capture all the audio and everything, so we're good. You're back, Leiland.
Yeah, I just had to rejoin. I'm sorry. And again,
nope,
thank you guys for sticking with us in the live stream. But I think when we record them, it'll be a lot better. I don't know if you said that.
Yeah, I was just saying that. There were some questions. I have to at least get one. We can try and get it here right at the end. The most important question of all time: what was in the letters at the Bush funeral?
Your guess is as good as mine. And I'm not going to pretend to have inside sources or any answers on anything.
Man, I want to know.
But I do follow all of that. Like, if you know me, when Donald Trump was elected, I looked for where's his side of the story. Where's who's anybody advocating for him as like not a bad guy, because I saw how everybody turned on him. It was strange to me because I was kind of disconnected from politics. And so to see all these people who I thought he was buddy with, all of a sudden making him out to be Mr. Hitler himself, it was just like, it was strange to me. So I bypassed the mainstream media early on in Donald Trump's presidency and found some of the back channels that I truly believe were associated directly with his campaign. And there's a lot of interesting spy versus spy games that are going on. And you would expect to be going on if Ezra's Eagle is true. If Donald Trump really is this like subversive short feather that got into office and totally made a ruckus of this Eagle's plans. And so to me, it makes sense. In fact, a lot of what was said through Donald Trump's back channel dissemination is what I'll say it. Like whether it's on the Chans or his communication style or Scavino or whatever it is, right? that it really did set up for this big fight, this big event where the eagle head shows itself in an extraordinary way. I think what he's done has made them reveal themselves already to a certain extent, to the point where now people are calling them out, and that's where they're just going to like, okay, fine, you got us, and here we go. Like, I credit Donald Trump and what was done there with that. Not that they're all true or all correct or that I agree with everything he did, but looking at it through this prophetic lens, how can I not accept this information that helps me, again, see more clearly what is actually going on? So I'll end on that. I love you guys. I love this platform. Thanks, Chris. Like, this is amazing. Are there any more questions, or that was kind of a Mimi question?
Okay, yeah. Let's hit two more. Mitch asked a couple times, do you see any parallels between the Franz Ferdinand assassination and the Iranian president recently dying?
I do. Yeah, I do for sure. Is it going to spark off in, I don't know. I don't know what tinderbox they'll use to spark it off, but even the Franz Ferdinand assassination, like, there's more to that story, and it involves secret combinations. So, like, definitely, whenever you have an assassination of one of the sticks in the tinderbox, right? Like, it's not a coincidence to me, especially believing in the conspiracy of history. So yeah, I think this is a sign that they're willing to start World War III or spark World War III, then I think let Donald Trump take presidency again. I think that's what we're witnessing, is that they're trying every avenue, whether it was first with Russia and trying to taunt Putin, or whether it will be in the Middle East here with the Israel provocations and things like that, or whether it will be in the Asian theater with Taiwan and things that will, I believe, at the same time here precipitate and come to fruition, where you're going to have a conflict in Southeast Asia. And so I believe it's a Franz Ferdinand event, but I don't think the public will be that fooled so easily. Like with Franz Ferdinand, they were just like, oh, yep, he's dead. Now we're in war and here we go. I think you have people asking enough questions that they might need a series of Franz Ferdinand events to really bring the world to war this time. So yeah, in that I see it kind of like that. I could be totally wrong, but I see it as like, I'm expecting more. I'm expecting more to happen, like more bad things.
Yeah, I keep thinking about how they can't seem to, no matter what they do, they can't seem to get the population on board anymore.
Right.
In a way where they could actually mobilize into war. Like, people just aren't. They're not having it anymore. And so then that worries me. What are they going to have to do to get that? And I have a feeling it's going to be something bad. Very, very bad.
Here's what I'll say too, is that this election year, I would expect that as we approach the summer here, in the next few weeks, in the next months, they're going to bring out the riot brigades again, have the protests of love or whatever it might be. They're going to have some excuse. Maybe it's the Israel-Palestine that they've already been kind of building with, these protests and things. But this is a normalization of violence and conflict in the streets. Like, this is a tactic of insurgency when they're trying to overthrow the government. And so I would expect that inside, like, expect that here on the home front for sure. And especially with whatever has come through the border in recent years, there may be some internal surprises. And instead of just Franz Ferdinand events way off in a far off country, I think this year we're going to see some hotbeds here at home. And so again, it just makes preparedness and awareness of these things that much more critical to you and your family and to your ward, to be in connection and aware of some of these dangers that we haven't experienced, in our neighborhood, where you have certain things you got to watch out for. Yeah, I'm just trying to be as general as possible on that without insulting anybody or whatever. But like, yeah, I think
no, that's good.
That's it.
I'll just add, don't get sucked into it. It's not worth it. Like, it's not. Just keep your eyes on the prophet. Do what he tells you to do. He's not going to tell you to go. Well, I'm not going to predict what he's going to tell you, but I doubt he tells you to go engage in these crazy, violent riot stuff that's going on. So don't get sucked into it, and keep your eyes on the prophet.
Amen. I think our spiritual preparedness is, like I said at the beginning, the weapon against Mystery Babylon is our righteousness, is our covenants, and our ability to call down power from God when Satan, presents himself essentially to the world.
I think that's perfect. Should we end there?
Absolutely. What of the night tonight? Well,
okay. Well,
there's an introduction.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to be diving into a lot more in future episodes. We just kind of wanted to give an introduction as to where we're coming from and what we're going to be doing. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for tuning in.